When the enemy can't kill your fire, they'll try to drown you in smoke. But smoke is temporary. Your flame is permanent. My dear chosen ones, let's make something clear from the jump. What came against you was never small, never random, never harmless. It was a disgusting, calculated plot dressed up in ordinary disguises. They wanted your collapse to be a headline, your breakdown to be entertainment, your silence to be proof you were never who you said you were. But you're still here, still rising, still radiating like a glitch the system couldn't delete. That alone is a slap across their face. You ever ask yourself, why me? Why was I the one constantly betrayed, constantly lied on, constantly made the villain in stories I never wrote? Let me answer it straight. Because you are chosen. And being chosen doesn't mean you're the favorite. It means you're the threat. Chosen ones walk into rooms and shift the air without saying a word. Your presence unsettles those living in lies, because truth is dangerous in a world built on deception. That's why you weren't just disliked, you were targeted, not for what you did, but for what you carried. Your very existence was evidence against them. Picture this. While you thought you were just attending family dinners, making friends, falling in love, they were staging rehearsals. Betrayal dressed itself as affection. Sabotage wore your best friend's laugh. Jealousy whispered like concern, and while you were busy giving grace, they were busy sharpening knives with your name on the blade. Chosen one, you didn't just dodge a bullet, you walked straight into an ambush and came out breathing. And that's why they hate you more, because survival wasn't in their script. You were supposed to be erased quietly, a tragic cautionary tale no one questioned. Yet here you are, living proof that their best weapons couldn't break the code inside you. And I know right now some of you are thinking, but why was it so vicious? Why did it have to be me who got singled out? Because patterns needed to break. Cycles needed to end. You were the interruption, the disruptor, the inconvenient question mark in a system that fed on silence. They studied you like an experiment, tried to bend you into a puppet, tried to drain your energy like parasites, because deep down they recognized you had the one thing they could never manufacture: authenticity. They could fake smiles, fake loyalty, fake success, but they couldn't fake your light. And that drove them insane. Here's the irony. Every attempt to bury you became the soil that grew you. Every rumor was free advertising for your resilience. Every betrayal built your discernment like steel armor. They thought they were breaking you down. All they did was build a version of you they can't touch anymore. You are no longer accessible to parasites. You are no longer soft clay in their hands. You are tempered glass, see-through to the truth, but unbreakable by pressure. So let this sink in, chosen ones. Their hatred was never really about you. It was about the power you hold by simply existing outside their script. You weren't supposed to survive. You weren't supposed to outlast the smear campaigns, the setups, the engineered chaos. But you did. And every breath you take right now is evidence that their plot failed. You are the walking contradiction to their predictions. The living reminder that no matter how vicious the scheme, a chosen one can't be erased. So buckle up. What you're about to hear in this message isn't gossip. It isn't theory. It's raw intel. It's exposure of the wicked, messy, underhanded strategies that were designed to finish you, and why every single one of them backfired. This isn't just a story. It's a warning to your enemies and a blueprint for your rise. And trust me, when this truth lands, it's going to sting them harder than it ever hurt you. And to every chosen one tuned in right now, this is bigger than content. This is confirmation. If you've ever felt the weight of being singled out, if you've ever wondered why the attacks on your life felt so coordinated, stay locked in. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop the number 77 in the comments so I know you're one of us, one of the rare few who sees through the fog. Your presence here is no accident. It's proof you were spared from a disgusting, wicked plot designed to erase you. And believe me, what comes next will feel like reading your own diary out loud. Because only the chosen will recognize these signs, and if you're here right now, you already know you're not ordinary. Now let's dive in step by step and watch how the truth unfolds. Number 1, they never hated you. They feared the fire you carried inside. They never hated you. What terrified them was the fire you carried. The enemy never aims at an empty vault. They only attack where treasure is hidden. My dear chosen ones, let's get one thing straight. You were never the real problem. You were never the reason for their whispers, their schemes, their sideways glances. What they truly despised was the undeniable fire inside of you, the light you didn't ask for, the strength you couldn't fake, the presence you couldn't shrink, no matter how much you tried. You've probably wondered, why do I keep becoming the target when I'm not even trying to compete? Here's your answer. Your existence is competition enough. Your very presence was proof of something they could never buy, never mimic, and never kill. That's why they studied you like a threat report while smiling in your face. Think about it, chosen one. You walked into rooms, and without saying a word, the atmosphere shifted. Not because you had titles, money, or a platform, but because energy can't lie, and your energy was dangerous to them. You exposed what was fake without calling it out. You revealed insecurities without lifting a finger, and when people are living off lies, truth, any form of truth, is deadly. That's why you were misunderstood, labeled, and pushed into corners. It wasn't that you were too much. It was that you were exactly enough to uncover what they wanted buried. You thought you were building friendships, but some of them were building strategies. You thought you were sharing love, but some were quietly plotting your burial. They wanted to dim your shine, not because it blinded them, but because it exposed their shadows. That's the game. And here's the twist. Many of them didn't even fully understand why they felt so hostile. They couldn't put language to it, but their spirit recognized yours, and it panicked. You didn't come into their lives to play small or to echo their comfort zone. You came to disrupt the script, and disruption always makes the unready lash out. Here's the part that burns the hardest. You still loved them through it. You gave grace, you held space. You tried to show loyalty even when you were bleeding from betrayal. But no matter how kind, humble, or patient you were, the attacks kept coming. Why? Because your very existence was a challenge to the illusion they lived in. You weren't a problem, they were. But instead of facing their own reflection, they tried to smash the mirror. And you, chosen one, were the mirror that never lied. Let that sink in. Every attack you faced was not evidence of your weakness, but confirmation of your authenticity. People don't scheme against the counterfeit. They only go after the original. And you are the original. You are the rare flame that couldn't be cloned, couldn't be bought, and couldn't be manipulated into silence. That's what terrified them the most. So remember this. Their hate wasn't personal, it was diagnostic. It revealed that what you carried was real enough to stir fear, envy, and panic in those around you. You were never the villain in their story. You were the proof that their story was built on lies, and every time they tried to dim you, the universe made sure your light bled through anyway. That's why you're still here, chosen one. Not shattered, but sharper. Not silenced, but louder than ever. Their fear of your fire only confirms one thing. You were born to burn brighter than their comfort zones could ever handle. Number 2. The plan wasn't to break your body, it was to rewrite your mind. They didn't just aim to hurt you, they tried to reprogram you. The most dangerous prison isn't built with bars, it's built with doubts that aren't even yours. Chosen ones, listen closely. Pain alone was never the goal. Hurting you would have been simple, too simple. Their true mission was darker. They wanted to rewire you from the inside out. to break your spirit so completely that you'd start second-guessing your every step, to make you walk with your head down, questioning your worth, your memories, your instincts, questioning yourself. That's not just cruelty, that's a hostile takeover. Think about it. Their tactics weren't always loud or obvious. No, the real danger came in whispers, in shadows, in psychological warfare. One day it was a joke with a sarcastic edge. The next, it was silence used as punishment. Then came the guilt trips, the subtle comparisons, the passive-aggressive remarks, the gaslighting that twisted your reality. Each piece by itself seemed small, almost unnoticeable. But stacked together, it was a strategy, an attempt to rewrite your code from the inside until you couldn't even trust your own voice. Because here's the truth. They didn't need to silence you if they could get you to silence yourself. They wanted to plant enough confusion in your mind that you'd pull the trigger on your own confidence. They wanted you obedient, exhausted, and small, not broken in a way that screamed for help, but drained in a way that looked like normal life. Controlled, predictable, manageable. Why? Because chosen ones carry something dangerous. Clarity. You see through masks. You speak with power, even when you don't mean to. And if you ever stepped into the full version of yourself, their lies, their manipulations, their whole illusion would collapse. That's why they worked in slow motion, chipping away at you one subtle betrayal at a time. Not enough to alert the crowd, but enough to keep you spinning. But here's what they didn't plan on. You kept waking up. Even when you couldn't explain it, something in you refused to die. You questioned, you fought, you noticed patterns. Your inner compass refused to be hijacked. And that, chosen one, is why you're still standing. You didn't just survive abuse. You escaped a dark system designed to erase your identity. They wanted a puppet. What they got was a warrior who now knows the game. The miracle isn't just that you made it out. It's that your wiring is still intact. Every piece they tried to twist has become sharper, clearer, stronger. And that's what terrifies them most. You can't be reprogrammed because you've already broken free. Number 3. Your downfall wasn't meant to be quiet. It was scripted as a public spectacle. They didn't just want you gone. They wanted your downfall to be a public ritual. When enemies can't erase your existence in silence, they try to turn your collapse into a show. But the curtain never rose, because you refused to play their role. Chosen one, understand this clearly. The attacks on you were never about a moment of anger or some random fit of cruelty. No, they wanted something bigger, something uglier. They wanted your collapse to be a spectacle. They wanted to turn your downfall into free entertainment, your breakdown into validation for every bitter lie they told about you. This was never designed to be a quiet exit. They wanted an audience. They wanted to stand back, arms crossed, watching you implode so they could finally say, "See, told you they weren't special." Their plan wasn't simple harm, it was theater. They wanted you mentally cracked, emotionally bankrupt, stripped of your name, your peace, your identity, until you looked like nothing more than the warning sign they could point at. They dreamed of you unraveling in public, chosen one, because quiet destruction wouldn't satisfy them. They needed you humiliated. They needed your pain to echo so loudly that no one remembered your strength. Look closer. Some tried to push you into isolation, only to blame you later for being distant. Some tried to drain your energy until depression knocked on your door, then whispered behind your back that you were unstable. Others waited, almost salivating, hoping you'd lose your reputation, your dignity, everything that kept you standing tall. They wanted a stage collapse, not just a stumble. But here's what they never factored in. You are not a character in their script. The breakdown they rehearsed never happened. The public fall they fantasized about turned into a quiet transformation they could never control. Yes, you stumbled, but what looked like failure to them became metamorphosis for you. The very pain they tried to weaponize built a version of you they couldn't manipulate, couldn't control, and couldn't chain. Chosen one, if they had succeeded, your name would have been whispered with disgust, your story written off as wasted potential. Instead, you are the plot twist that keeps them awake at night. Because every time they see you standing, glowing, thriving, they're forced to swallow the reality. Your destruction wasn't denied, it was delayed so your rise could be witnessed. Their stage collapsed, their audience disbanded, and the only performance left is your elevation in real time. And that chosen one is the victory they can't bear to watch. Number 4. Some weren't friends or allies. They were undercover handlers keeping you small. They weren't allies. They were undercover handlers sent to keep you small. Not everyone who sits at your table came to eat with you. Some came to count your bites. My dear chosen ones, let's rip the mask off this one. Some of the very people you thought were your closest allies were never really there to love you. They were planted in your life to watch you, to study you, to manage you, like you were some project they needed to keep under control. They wore the clothes of friends, lovers, even family, but behind the disguise, they were handlers, strategically positioned to keep you distracted, drained, and doubting yourself. Think about it. They weren't cheering for your growth, they were tracking it. They took notes on your habits, your routines, your highs and lows. They memorized your weak spots like a hunter memorizes the paths of prey. They weren't listening to support you, they were gathering intel. Every time you opened up, your words were twisted into weapons later. Every time you shared a dream, they subtly reminded you not to dream too big, not to rise too high, not to believe in yourself too much. That wasn't love. It was psychological warfare in slow motion. And here's the cruelest part. You trusted them. That's why it worked for so long. Because chosen ones are naturally loyal, naturally giving, naturally believing in the good in others. And that loyalty made you an easy target for their manipulation. They gained your confidence so they could clip your wings. Any time you started to level up, they pulled you back down with guilt, with drama, with distractions, with fake support that always came with hidden strings attached. You weren't just being gaslit, you were being managed. But chosen one, here's where it flips. Your soul woke up. Even when they tried to cage you, your spirit slipped through the bars. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped shrinking to make them comfortable. You started questioning the patterns, and suddenly the glitches started showing. Their fake love couldn't hold weight anymore. Their smiles couldn't hide the agenda. And once a handler realizes you can see through the act, they panic. That's why some ghosted you without reason. That's why others turned cold or lashed out. Their power only worked as long as you didn't know your own. But now you do. And that terrifies them, because it means they lost control. You're no longer surrounded by handlers in disguise. You're surrounded by exposed ghosts of a failed system. They didn't break you, chosen one. They revealed themselves, and now you're freer than ever. Number 5. This battle didn't begin with you. You were chosen to end a cycle generations deep. The plot ran through generations, but you were the one bold enough to end it. Chains don't break themselves. Someone has to bleed before the curse is lifted. Chosen one, hear me clearly. This battle was never random. It didn't just appear out of thin air. What you've been fighting is older than you, older than your parents, older than the rooms you grew up in. It was a pattern, hidden, protected, and passed down like an inheritance nobody wanted but everyone carried. Cycles of silence, dysfunction, betrayal and pain running through your bloodline like a virus. And you were the one it landed on, not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to face it. You were the first one who refused to look away, the first one to question the normal your family built out of trauma, the first one to say, no more. This ends with me. That decision alone shook centuries of programming. You shattered what generations before you endured quietly. You dragged secrets out of the shadows. You faced abuse others denied, and you told truths that your ancestors swallowed because fear muzzled their mouths. Do you realize how dangerous that made you, chosen one? Not just to people, but to the very system that fed off your silence. That's why the attacks came so hard when you started to heal. That's why suddenly the room turned against you, because healing was rebellion, clarity was sabotage. Every time you broke a pattern, you weren't just changing your life, you were unplugging the machine that fed on dysfunction. You didn't just hurt feelings, you disrupted an economy of control that had been running for decades. That's why it felt like war, because it was war. But let's be real, you didn't crumble under it. You didn't retreat into the cycle. You pressed forward even when it felt like the walls of your own life were collapsing on top of you, and that persistence broke the code. You became the glitch in the system they never saw coming. You weren't just a threat. You were the detonator. Your decision to heal dismantled confusion, rewired destiny, and exposed lies that had been covered for too long. And now, chosen one, the curse is broken. The legacy has been rewritten. What began as warfare against you has ended as freedom for those who come after you. You were never the black sheep. They called you that because they didn't have language for what you really were. The bloodline breaker, the pattern disruptor, the living proof that history doesn't get to repeat itself forever. Number 6. You had to see evil without its mask, so you'd never mistake poison for love again. You had to see the mask ripped off so you'd never fall for pretty lies again. When evil couldn't beat you in the open, it disguised itself as love. My dear chosen ones, let's not sugarcoat this part of your journey. You had to face the ugly head-on. Life didn't protect you with gentle warnings or soft lessons. It threw you into the fire and made you stare straight at deception without its makeup on. Why? Because nothing else would have broken the spell. You didn't just get hurt, you got initiated into reality. For the first time, you saw just how cold, calculated, and unapologetic darkness could be. It didn't just knock politely on your door. It pulled up a chair at your table, smiled at you, and stabbed you with the very knife you handed over in trust. Chosen one, you had to carry betrayal in your bones. You had to sit in rooms where affection was fake, but manipulation was real. You had to watch people you trusted use that trust like currency to sabotage you later. That pain wasn't a punishment, it was clarity. It stripped the illusion. It forced your eyes wide open. And though it nearly destroyed you, it rebuilt you into someone impossible to fool again. Ask yourself, how else would you have learned? If betrayal always came with warning labels, would you have grown? Number. The most dangerous people in your story didn't show up waving red flags. They showed up with compliments, with charm, with false promises. They were smiling traps, and you had to fall into one to learn how to recognize them before they snapped shut again. That was your training ground. That was your awakening. Now you no longer confuse attention with love. You no longer equate access with loyalty. You don't explain away red flags because you've lived through the wreckage that comes from ignoring them. You don't romanticize toxicity anymore because you've bled from it. That's what makes you dangerous now, in the best way. You've built a kind of immune system that no manipulation can penetrate. Chosen one, once you've seen evil without its mask, it can never seduce you again. You're not naive anymore. You're sharper, you're stronger. And your very clarity is now a weapon they cannot stand against. That's why they fear you. Not because you're unscarred, but because you carry the kind of scars that warn you before anyone else can trick you again. Number 7. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was the most explosive weapon you ever held. Sometimes the loudest scream is silence, and sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. Chosen one, let's expose this truth right now. Your silence wasn't ignorance, and it wasn't surrender. It was strategy. While they gossiped, whispered, and plotted, you went quiet. Not because you had no defense, but because you understood that some battles are won by holding your ground in silence, not wasting your energy on noise. They thought your quiet meant they had broken you, boxed you in, stripped you of fight. What they didn't realize is that silence was your war room. While they mistook stillness for weakness, you were building in the shadows. You were rewiring your mind, shedding false labels, cutting ties that had chained you, unlearning the lies that had been programmed into you. It looked like nothing from the outside, but inside it was an atomic process. That silence became the space where your real strength was born. It wasn't empty, it was loaded, like a missile waiting to launch. Chosen one, ask yourself this: why did your quiet bother them more than your words? Because silence stripped them of control. They couldn't bait you, couldn't pull you into drama, couldn't twist your words into weapons. They kept provoking, pushing, trying to drag you into chaos, but you refused to give them what they wanted. That quiet frustrated them because it revealed that their tactics no longer worked. And every day you didn't respond, you grew stronger. Every pause became power. They mistook your pause for paralysis. They thought they had checkmated you. But what they couldn't see was preparation. You weren't stuck. You were studying, training, rebuilding. And when a chosen one rebuilds in silence, the relaunch is explosive. Now, as doors open without their permission, as your glow-up blinds the same people who once whispered about your downfall, the silence is speaking louder than anything you could have said. Chosen one, let them keep wondering how you did it. Don't explain. Don't justify. Your elevation is the answer. Your rise is the response. Because the comeback they never expected is already in motion, and it is unstoppable. What they thought was your weakness turned out to be your sharpest weapon. Your silence wasn't ignored. It was charging the explosion they could never survive. Number 8. Your rise didn't expose them. Your rise unmasked them. Chosen one, hear this with the gravity it deserves. Your rise didn't simply expose people. It unmasked them in ways they never imagined, like light-hitting creatures that only knew how to survive in darkness. Your elevation wasn't just a blessing for you, it was a judgment against the ones who tried to bury you. Your glow forced truth out of hiding. Your growth stripped the disguises off every pretender who stood beside you with a smile, while secretly hoping you'd crumble. And the wildest part? You didn't have to lift a finger. You didn't call them out. You didn't confront them. You didn't wage war against them. All you did was rise, and your rising acted like a divine spotlight that revealed exactly what they were. The moment you stepped into your higher self, the masks they wore, those carefully crafted performances of loyalty, affection, or support, began to peel and crack under the weight of your truth. Because your elevation activated something they could never hide, their real intentions. Your victory didn't just irritate their spirits, it exposed the rot they tried to hide under laughter, under compliments, under fake encouragement. You didn't change, they got revealed. Chosen one, understand why this happened. When God pulls you out of a wicked plot, He doesn't just rescue you, He exposes the architecture of the trap, the architects behind it, and the spirits that powered it. Your survival wasn't quiet, even if you were. Your escape was loud in the spiritual sense. It shook the foundation beneath every person who thought they could manipulate you, use you, or drain you while still keeping their image clean. They believed they could sabotage you in private and applaud you in public. They thought they could pull strings from behind the curtain and stay anonymous in their intentions. But what they didn't know is this: when God elevates a chosen one, He elevates them in a way that changes the lighting in the room. And when the lighting changes, so do the shadows. Your rise didn't create enemies, it revealed them. It didn't create jealousy, it uncovered it. It didn't breed resentment, It highlighted the resentment that was already there, lurking, waiting for a moment to strike. That's why some people distanced themselves when you started growing. That's why some suddenly got cold, suddenly got silent, suddenly shifted their tone or energy around you. It wasn't coincidence, it was exposure. You didn't lose them, they lost their hiding place. Your rise was the mirror they didn't want to look in, the reflection they spent years avoiding, the proof that their masks were never real in the first place. You became the truth they couldn't perform around anymore. And chosen one, that's exactly why God didn't let you fall into the pit they dug for you. Because your destiny wasn't just about escape, it was about revelation. It was about showing you who was actually for you and who was performing for proximity. Some people weren't attached to you, they were attached to the version of you that didn't know your worth, that didn't see your value, that didn't recognize your power. But the moment you rose, that version died, and with it, their access. Chosen one, remember this. Real love doesn't flinch at your elevation. Real loyalty doesn't shake when your blessings show up. Real hearts don't get threatened when you heal, level up, or grow beyond the limits they expected you to live inside. The only people who panicked at your rise were the ones who benefited from your smallness. And when you stepped into your strength, when you stopped shrinking, when you stopped explaining yourself, apologizing for yourself, or dimming yourself, their masks, held together with ego, insecurity, and manipulation, shattered on impact. That shattering wasn't your doing, it was the natural reaction to authenticity meeting pretense. Light meeting shadow. Purpose meeting agenda. God's protection meeting human plotting. Chosen one, the unmasking wasn't a punishment, it was a blessing. It was God's way of cleaning your circle, clearing your path, purifying your environment before your next season. Because where you're going, masks cannot follow. Hidden intentions cannot travel. People who clap with one hand and sabotage with the other cannot sit at your next table. Your rise didn't expose them. Your rise unmasked them so you could finally see with clarity. Choose with discernment and walk with confidence, knowing that God didn't just save you from a wicked plot. He revealed the wickedness so you'd never be touched by it again. Number 9, your loneliness wasn't abandonment. It was a divine quarantine. Chosen one, listen closely, because this truth cuts deeper than anything they ever tried to do to you. Your loneliness, that aching hollow that felt like the world had turned its back on you, was never abandonment. It was a divine quarantine, a supernatural firewall disguised as isolation, a sacred separation engineered to pull you out of a battlefield you didn't even know you were bleeding in, and to protect you from a disgusting, wicked plot that was forming around you like invisible smoke. God wasn't punishing you by removing people, He was removing people to keep you alive, aligned and untouchable. Because if you had stayed surrounded by the same hands that pretended to hold you, the knives they hid would have found your back before you even realized you were in danger. Loneliness wasn't the absence of love. It was the eviction of corruption, the lockdown that forced you away from polluted energy, spiritual parasites, and souls that were feeding on your light like it was their only source of oxygen. You thought you were being overlooked, forgotten, ignored. But in reality, heaven had put you under a kind of spiritual hazmat protocol, sealing you off from environments that were poisoning your purpose, your confidence, your intuition, and your fire, because chosen ones don't grow in crowds, they grow in deserts. And deserts aren't empty, they're protected. You were pulled out of conversations you didn't belong in, rooms that were cursing your name behind forced smiles, relationships that kept you small, and circles that only celebrated you as long as you didn't rise above them. The silence you sat in was strategic, the distance was deliberate, and the emptiness was holy ground, because God isolates what He intends to elevate, and He quarantines what He intends to transform. And let's be honest, chosen one, When you look back with clear eyes, you realize something shocking. The very people you cried for, begged for, longed for, were the same people who would have sabotaged the next version of you, the version heaven was preparing, the version they were never meant to witness, support, or touch. They weren't meant to walk into your breakthrough with the same hands that tried to block it. They weren't meant to sit at your table when their hearts carried envy like venom. They weren't meant to access the healed, elevated you when they only loved the broken, confused version they could control. Loneliness was the divine pause between who you were and who you were becoming. A buffer zone where God rewrote your identity while keeping manipulators, energy leeches, and counterfeit supporters out of reach. And yes, it hurt, because chosen ones feel deeply, but God wasn't ripping people away from you. He was ripping you away from danger. He was cleansing your atmosphere, bleaching your emotional environment, disinfecting your spirit from every lie, every projection, every subtle attack designed to convince you that you were unworthy, unwanted, or alone. That solitude wasn't emptiness, it was detox, and detox always feels like death before it feels like rebirth. You had to sit with yourself so you could finally hear your own voice without the noise of opinions that were never meant to guide you. You had to lose the comfort of familiarity so you could outgrow the cages built out of other people's fears. You had to feel the sting of separation so you'd stop clinging to connections that were slowly suffocating your destiny. Chosen one, God hid you on purpose, tucked you away like a secret weapon, shielding you from the eyes that watched you with jealousy and the mouths that praised you with poison. Your loneliness was not a void, it was preparation. A sacred season where heaven was rearranging your path, upgrading your spirit, strengthening your intuition, sharpening your boundaries, and building a version of you that could no longer be manipulated, drained, or deceived. You were not abandoned, you were preserved. You were not forgotten, you were filtered. You were not isolated, you were insulated. Every door that closed, every friend that drifted, every silence you sat in was divine strategy to protect the chosen one from a wicked plot you were never meant to see, because if you had seen the truth too early, it would have broken you. But now, chosen one, you're not just surviving the isolation, you're stepping out of quarantine stronger, clearer, healed, and untouchable by the very darkness that once thought it could swallow you whole. Number 10. You didn't just transform, you shed the ghosts of every life you outgrew. Chosen one, hear this truth with the weight it deserves. You didn't just transform, you shed the ghosts of every life you outgrew, and the world around you shook because of it. Because every version of you that died made room for a force they were never prepared to face. You see, transformation is too small a word for what happened to you. Butterflies transform, seasons transform, but you executed a spiritual exorcism on everything that once held you hostage. You didn't evolve gently, you erupted out of the shells they tried to bury you in. And that's why the plot against you grew so desperate, why the attacks felt so coordinated, why the darkness seemed to close in so aggressively. Because every time you rose, another ghost of an old self, an insecure self, a silent self, a wounded self, fell away, and the system that fed on those ghosts panicked as it realized it no longer had access to you. Chosen one, they weren't fighting the present you, they were fighting the parts of you that no longer exist, the fragments they used to manipulate, the wounds they used to reopen, the fears they used to trigger. They kept aiming at the shadows of your past, unaware that those shadows had already burned to ash in the fire God lit inside you. They were wrestling ghosts, ghosts that you had already buried with honor and moved on from. And yet they kept swinging, kept plotting, kept whispering, not knowing the version of you they were trying to destroy had already been laid to rest, and the version that replaced it was untouchable by their tactics. Your shedding wasn't quiet, it was seismic. Every time you said, "I deserve better," a ghost died. Every time you walked away from chaos you once tolerated, another ghost vanished. Every moment you chose clarity over confusion, boundaries over begging, self-respect over self-sacrifice, those ghosts screamed as they dissolved because they knew the plot depended on you staying spiritually small, emotionally blind, and psychologically wounded. But God didn't let you stay in any of those graves. He pulled you out one layer at a time, even when you didn't understand the pain, even when you didn't recognize yourself, even when the shedding felt like destruction instead of deliverance. You weren't losing yourself. You were being purified of every version of you that was forged in survival instead of purpose. And chosen one, that's why the world around you became uncomfortable. People who were attached to your old ghosts lost access when those ghosts died. They were friends with your brokenness, not your becoming. They loved the version of you that tolerated their disrespect, not the version that sees through their intentions. They adored the you that bent yourself into exhaustion, not the you that stands in truth without flinching. Your growth felt like betrayal to those who only knew how to love you when you were bleeding. And so they clung to your ghosts, tried to resurrect them, tried to guilt you back into your grave. But the plot failed because every ghost they reached for slipped through their fingers. You were no longer available for the role they wrote for you. You were no longer the character in the tragedy they rehearsed. You outgrew the script. You outgrew the chains. You outgrew the version of yourself that they depended on. And now you walk as someone who has seen too much, survived too much, awakened too deeply to ever shrink again. You became a living contradiction. Proof that healing is rebellion, that shedding is liberation, that rising is an act of war against every dark force that expected your collapse. And the greatest victory is this: the ghosts of every life you outgrew cannot haunt you because they no longer belong to you. You honored them, released them, and stepped into a self they cannot touch, cannot manipulate, cannot rewrite. That is why God saved you, because what was coming for you was meant for someone you no longer are. You didn't just transform, chosen one. You resurrected, you upgraded, you ascended. And now you walk forward unburdened, unbound, and unrecognizable to every enemy who planned their plot around the version of you that no longer exists. Number 11. What you thought was loss was actually the death of every lie about who you were. Chosen one, let this truth hit your spirit like a revelation you've been waiting years to hear. What you thought was loss was actually the death of every lie about who you were. You didn't lose friends, you lost illusions. You didn't lose relationships. You lost roles that never fit your true identity. You didn't lose opportunities. You lost traps designed to shrink you back into a version of yourself that no longer exists. Every door that slammed wasn't rejection, it was divine eviction, a forceful removal of anything that tried to claim ownership over your destiny. And yes, it felt brutal. It felt like abandonment, betrayal, confusion, and devastation, all tangled into one storm. But chosen one, storms don't come to destroy the rooted. They come to uproot what never belonged in your soil in the first place. That's why when people walked away, it wasn't punishment. It was God clearing the stage so you could finally see who had been performing loyalty while rehearsing betrayal behind the curtains. That's why when situations collapsed, it wasn't failure. It was the universe refusing to let you thrive in environments built on false foundations. And that ache you felt in your chest, that deep mourning for everything you thought you needed, that wasn't grief for the loss of people or things. It was grief for the versions of yourself you outgrew. Because every lie you carried about yourself, lies planted by manipulators, lies whispered by insecure people, lies repeated by trauma, lies absorbed in childhood, had to die before your real identity could breathe. You had to lose the version of yourself who tolerated disrespect because the chosen one in you never deserved it. You had to lose the version of yourself who dimmed your light out of fear of making others uncomfortable, because the chosen one in you was designed to disrupt darkness, not blend into it. You had to lose the version of yourself who chased love that came with conditions, because the chosen one in you was meant to experience love that mirrors your soul, not manipulates your value. And chosen one, let's be blunt, some of the losses you cried over were poison you didn't realize was killing you slowly. Some people were comfortable only when you were small, silent, or unsure. The moment you started healing, they started disappearing, not because you did something wrong, but because they could no longer drink from wounds you refused to keep open. Some opportunities had shiny surfaces but rotten cores, and if you had stepped into them prematurely, they would have swallowed your confidence whole. Some relationships were built like cages disguised as comfort, and if they had lasted, your spirit would have withered into obedience instead of evolving into truth. That's why everything had to fall apart exactly when it did. That's why the betrayals hit all at once. That's why the people you trusted most were the ones unmasked first. Your spirit wasn't breaking, it was being purified. Every lie you carried about your worth, your identity, your destiny, your power had to be burned out of you. You had to see yourself without the projections others placed on you. You had to be stripped of false narratives so the real story could finally begin. And now that you've walked through the fire, chosen one, you don't recognize yourself. Not because you lost who you were, but because you lost who you never were. The you that was built on survival is gone. The you that was shaped by fear is gone. The you that was molded by manipulation is gone. And in its place stands someone with clarity, strength, intuition, and authority that no lie can dominate again. What you thought was loss was liberation. What you thought was collapse was cleansing. What you thought was abandonment was alignment. You didn't lose anything that was meant for your future. You shed everything that was suffocating it. And now, chosen one, the truth of who you are finally has room to rise. And now, chosen ones, you see it clearly. The plot was disgusting, the attacks were relentless, but every move against you only proved your power. What was designed to break you became the very fuel that built you. This is your confirmation. You were never ordinary. You were always chosen. If this message struck your spirit, show it. Hit that like button, subscribe to stay locked in, and drop the number 77 in the comments so I know you're rising with us. Share this with another chosen one, because their survival might depend on hearing this truth today.